Taylor Wallace here, KUTX at home session. I am so stoked for my guest today. You know him as one half of the incredible, brilliant comedy duo, Tim and Eric, also the podcast, Office Hours, as well as the web series On Cinema. The new album, Fear of Death, is out now, and I'm joined by my guest today, Tim Heidecker. Hi.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So in doing like prep for this, the experience of you recording this album is kind of wild to me. And I feel like I wanted to like parenthetically, this album is like the Drew Erickson project.
Yeah.
So the new album, Fear of Death, heavily featured by Natalie Mering, better known as Weyes Blood. Mm-hmm. And y'all's story of how y'all met is interesting, but instead of me telling the world about it, can you tell us?
I guess I don't know how, everyone's got to meet some way, but we met backstage at a Father John Misty benefit show he was doing for the wildfires here in California a few years back. She was performing, and I had heard about her. Her record Titanic Rising was produced by Jonathan Rado, who produced my last record, and he had told me about her, that I would like her style. He's like, she's got this incredible voice, and it's got this Joni Mitchell kind of vibe to it, and that sounded good to me. But yeah, I met her, and it turned out we had some mutual friends, and she was a fan of my comedy. And I had her on my podcast, Office Hours. And through that, we kind of sort of loosely talked about collaborating some way, because she seemed to dig my tunes. And Drew Erickson, who you mentioned, heard that. And he's sort of this local LA, session guy who knows everybody, and is a really beautiful arranger and player himself, and just kind of put this session together, and told me to come with some songs ready, and he would kind of take care of the rest.
Well, and for context, Drew Erickson also keyboardist on Titanic Rising too.
Yeah, I think he had arranged some of the strings as well. He was in Roger Waters' touring band for a while, and I think he's working with Father John Misty now. So it's a good guy to have on your side.
Well, and so in reading the story of it, felt like on a Thursday, he's like, hey, let's do this thing. And then 3 days later, you're in a studio with and I looked at the personnel of the album. There's like 20 people on this album.
Yeah, I mean, not all at once. Sort of, there were a couple different groups of sessions. And so on the first group of sessions, we had Stella from the band, the drummer from Warpaint. I always screw up her last name, so I don't want to. Mozgawa, I think it is.
I was gonna let you say it.
Yeah, but and then the Lemon Twigs brothers, the Diodario brothers, happened to have been in town, and they came by and did a day. And the next session was some other people who aren't necessarily household names, but really talented players: Josh Adams, Mike Bloom, and this pedal steel player that goes by the name of Catfish, who just, all these people came in and just kind of added their texture and their colors and to the record over time.
So were you already writing the album when this came about, or did you start writing these songs because of the session?
A little bit of both. I had about 4 or 5 songs in my sort of demos folder that I was able to draw from. Fear of Death, the title track, was a song I played for Natalie on my podcast as a song we could do together. But I wasn't really thinking in terms of an album. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I just jumped at the opportunity to go in a studio with some good players, because it's always a good time. And so I had some songs, and they weren't really connected at first. But then after that session, I kind of thought, wow, if I could reassemble a version of this group again and come back with some more songs, I think it kind of inspired me to write some more, more focused songs, I guess.
Sure. My guest today, Tim Heidecker, we're talking about the new album, Fear of Death. And so you were talking about how Drew is an arranger. And I was curious, especially like, you know, some of the songs that have a lot of like string, instruments. So did he do most of that arranging? I'm just so impressed by your by your breadth of work. So I was just curious as to like, are you an arranger, or did you just, you know, have the songs and then he kind of like took it and ran with it?
It's a little bit of both. When I try to do a demo that is fairly laid out part wise to some degree, and then it's really up to the musician's interpretation. So no one's really looking, you know, Drew was great about putting together some sort of basic lead sheets for everybody to go off of, but then it becomes just like get good players in the room together and then they add their own texture and we guide them and give them notes. There's some strings on the record, and those were arranged and conducted by this guy Trey Pollard. That's part of the Space Bomb group, and that's like a thing that they do. That they have a studio down there, and they have a group of players that you know, it's live strings, real people, not a MIDI keyboard situation. So it's just like this great collaborative experience, you know. I have some ideas in that, like for instance, in the song Property, there's a horn part, and I kind of wrote that with this idea that it would kind of be a variation on When the Saints Go Marching In. And so I give, you know, my horn players some general guidance, but then, you know, you got to let them kind of run with it.
You've talked a lot about growing up in a very musical family, and I know you have a pretty rich theatrical background as well. But in both your more sincere albums as well as your comedy albums, sonically it seems to has this like pretty consistently like this Southern rock, Americana, almost like oscillates a little between like jam band kind of vibe too. And I'm curious where that particular inspiration comes from and why that seems to be like kind of your bag.
Oh, well, that's a good question. I guess I grew up listening to classic rock. You know, I guess when I was much younger, it was more a British influence, Beatles and the Who and the Kinks and those kind of groups. But you know, one of my favorite records is Wildflowers by Tom Petty. And you know, Bruce Springsteen I just absolutely love. And you know, and as I get older, I look more into, I get deeper into country music and folk music and, you know, singer-songwriter stuff, Paul Simon, you know, so much that I just like, you know, the warmth and the richness of the you know, those records, the playing of, you know, that's I just have a hard time connecting with electronic, you know, kind of programmed music. And the more I get older, I guess the more I just go back to that kind of sound that are generally how I like to make my records lately, which is get good people in a room together, have songs that are fairly simple in structure. And sometimes that also makes them kind of, dare I say, catchy, because they basically are campfire songs or nursery rhyme style songs. You know, they're not meant to be too confusing or tricky or complicated.
Well, I've listened to the album a few times, and yesterday when I was listening to it on my front porch, it just like it reminded me of like some early Grateful Dead albums, and they're one of my favorite groups, and it was just like, it's just really nice and pretty. And I know you've said that you're a fan of quote pretty sounding music. But the concept of the album is existential, it's dark, and I think it's a good what's the word I'm looking for?
Cathartic.
It's a good juxtaposition. And I'm curious, So the album largely being about kind of going through middle age and everything, was writing the album to work through that cathartic, or were you just like, God, why am I doing this to myself?
No, I love it. I love feeling an emotional connection to the work I'm doing, like whatever it is. And for some reason, this one, there's certain songs on it that feel emotionally like I'm connecting to a feeling I have,
Mm-hmm.
about a certain thing. Like in the song Backwards, I feel like I'm reflecting on, I have kids and I have a real concerns about the future when it comes to, their future and the world we're making for them. And much of my work in the past has been fairly emotionally removed from the work, and that's fine, and that's been fun. But it's also nice to be able to make something that resonates with me and also with people that listen to it. So even though it's dark, some of the subject matter is dark, it's also very universal. We all think about uh, these things from time to time, and we shouldn't ignore it. We can talk about it.
Yeah. My guest today is Tim Heidecker. We're talking about the new album, Fear of Death. And I want to talk about the song Little Lamb.
Yeah.
And I I feel for you in that it seems like some people are allowed to creatively oscillate. They can be absurd, they can be serious, and they can do everything in between. But when you try to do that from your own fan base, it's not always the reception isn't always warm. As opposed, and as I was thinking about the song and thinking about like people like Mark Duplass, who can be,
Hmm.
who, spent years on on the FX show The League, but then
Hmm.
also made this like brilliant Togetherness on HBO. But he can do horror, he can do comedy, he can kind of do whatever he wants, and he's lauded for it.
Hmm.
But you're not necessarily afforded that same thing from your own fan base. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know if that's, I think I am to some degree. I've been able to do it, and I do it, but I always, I give way too much credit to the loud but small chorus of, complainers online. There's really, I'm sure everybody has them in anybody in public life sort of has them. And to the degree you acknowledge that is really your choice, in that song you're talking about, it was just a moment where occasionally as I put stuff out, you have people that, you know, tell you what they think. And then sometimes it's like, don't, I wish you'd go back to being this one thing that I liked of you, like this one version of what I thought was funny about you. And I just kind of thought of that in terms of a song, which is like, from a very arrogant place, I'm way ahead of you, and you will, you will eventually catch up. Or if you don't, I don't care. Like I'm not doing this to please you. I'm doing this to to see through ideas I have the best of my ability. So, but I give him too much credit, because I do get so much such a lovely response from so many people. And also I get people that don't really know me as a comedian, or didn't come to find me as a comedian. They found me through listening to this program, this kind of program, or hearing my songs on the radio or something. So um, I can only get so invested in caring about what other people think.
Have you ever watched someone's face in real time, the light bulb go off, they're coming at you, knowing you as a musician, and then and then the Tim and Eric thing clicks, and they're like, "Oh my God."
I don't know. I've this year's been very hard to observe anybody in real time, so I haven't really. But yeah, the funniest one I had was this woman that interviewed me for something, and I had done this thing called The Trial, which was through the On Cinema show. It was this 5-hour fake trial that was shot very realistically, and she had found me through that, had just randomly found that on YouTube and hadn't seen anything else or knew anything else. And that was the first thing she saw. And she loved it. She realized that it wasn't real, but she then went back and was like, oh my God, there's these Tim and Eric shows and there's this music and all this stuff. So I think that's always, people are always turning a certain age when they're open to this kind of stuff. And whether they've been there from the beginning or just finding out about it today, I think it's cool either way.
Cool. The last thing I want to talk about, and the most radio friendly thing, the album art.
Yeah,
which is so cool. Robert Beatty.
Yeah, I mean, everything about this record was like, let's go for the Lemon Twigs. Let's go for let's go for the best. And Drew had turned me on to his work. I'd seen it before, but I didn't really know him or know him by name. And he said, I bet he'd do the cover, everything was kind of like that, who would be the best person for this part of the project. And he was all in, and he just did a beautiful job,
I completely, it's great because it's a beautiful piece of art, but then there's all of these other like little details. You have to like keep looking at it over and over and over again. You see something new every time. And for those listening, Robert Beatty, he's worked with Tame Impala, he's worked with Flaming Lips, Bedouin, the OCs. Just countless incredible artists. And that's really cool. So again, that was a Drew connection.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he dropped the name and I followed through on it, but yeah, good. The guy's the guy to know.
Well, Tim Heidecker, thank you so much for your time today. The new album, Fear of Death, out now, heavily featuring the wonderful Natalie Mering, also known as Weyes Blood. Thank you for your time, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. You too. All the best. Bye. Thanks.